Hello?
Turn off your telephones. I think we forgot to say that at the beginning. So before we bring Lena up, I just wanted to get Laurie started with a kind of a question about the sort of using the title of the series, which is sort of artists loving movies and Laurie making movies. And so I thought if you could talk a little bit about what motivated you to do this and the story, where it was generated, but also talk a little bit about, because I think we'll kind of cut to the chase a bit, within it talk a little bit about the difference between Laurie Simmons, artist, and Ellie, artist, and how you viewed that work.
That's a very long question. Which part?
You can start anywhere you want.
Were you asking me why I decided to make a movie about it?
Let's talk a little bit about the genesis, yeah.
Okay. Well, it actually started with my daughter, Lena Dunham, who's here, and playing the part of Siri in Tiny Furniture. And it was interesting to me the way that Lena wrote Siri, because as uncharming a character as she was, and she kind of was, I felt she was also something of a caricature and maybe a tiny bit inaccurate by my standards. And I started thinking about portrayals of artists in movies and how artists I know sit around and talk about artist portrayals in movies, how we criticize them and never feel that they're accurate. It's just one of the games. I mean, my favorite artist movie, just to get that out there, is A Horse's Mouth, 1956, Alec Guinness. I feel like that's the most accurate portrayal. That's a long time ago. So around 2009 or 10, this character, this Ellie character, just started appearing in my brain, literally. It just started writing herself in my brain, and I actually wondered if I could do it, if I could make an accurate representation of an artist, specifically a woman artist, and an artist of a certain age. That was really important to me, to make a movie about an artist who wasn't necessarily the most famous artist in the world and who was just doing her work and showing her process. So that's in a nutshell the genesis of sort of, and I will say that it was the closest thing in my life that I could ever to an obsession. It was an obsession to get this thing written and then made.
And so the follow-up is this question of the artwork that Ellie produces. How did you go about choosing the clips? How did you think of her as an artist? Is that Laurie Simmons' work on the screen as the vignettes, or is that something articulated very specifically by the character that you built?
Oh, it's for sure Ellie's work, and I think the hardest part of writing this was figuring out what Ellie's work was going to actually be, because thinking about all the artist movies and thinking about movies about painters, watching a painter paint on film is literally like watching paint peel. It can be, it can be over dramatized, and everyone knows the various movies, but it's chipping away at marble. That's another one that's kind of a cliche. No offense to any of the sculptors or painters in the audience, but I really did think about the fact that artists love movies. I thought about how performance art is always depicted as being sort of crazy and sort of abstract and sort of expressionistic, and I thought, what if I could combine an artist's love of film with the idea of being a performance artist? And also I felt like in recreating these vignettes that were about the films and the actresses that Ellie obviously would have looked at when she was young, that it might be another way to kind of, another way to meditate on aging, and Ellie's and Frank's aging specifically, with this kind of, throwback to another time. And as the Ellie character said, just the realization that you could never be the screen idols that are up on the screen. You could never be them, and she could also never be as young as they were again. So
we're going to bring Lena up, but in bringing her up, I just talk a little bit about the beginning of the film. I refuse to believe this works, but what we did at the beginning when we were at the Whitney, as in terms of both the beginning of the story, but also talking about the family, because to a certain extent, when you're making a film with Laurie, there's a lot of people involved in her life that have a certain kind of, I would say, they have high visibility characters between her husband and both her daughters, and I think we talked a lot about her being able to go off and be her own filmmaker and not have to be part of the entourage of her family. So if you watch the beginning, you start to see that in the museum you have Tip's painting, and you have, at the first scene is Lena, and finally when the family has sort of worked its way through the opening sequences and she sits down, you see writer, director Laurie Simmons. And so there was this kind of attempt for us to sort of put a lot of the gossip and all the stuff that comes with, the trades behind us, and let Laurie work and make the film that she really wanted to make.
MacGuffin, right? Is that what the MacGuffin is? Isn't that the, yeah.
So in any event, the next question becomes one between the daughter and the mother about what it was like to work with. So could you welcome Lena Dunham to this?
Thanks, Andy. What a civilized Sunday crowd.
Yeah. The Hamptons.
So, Lena, just talk a bit about the support system of someone who had sort of, you had some really great success with Tiny Furniture, and then you were going on and you were doing your TV series, and then your mom says, "I want to be a filmmaker."
Well, I think that if you're inside of our family and you know about what my mom has done work-wise, I mean, she's such a huge part of the reason that I wanted to make films or even thought I could make films, because it was always like the language of cinema and organizing things in a cinematic way was always a part of what she did. And my first experience on a film set in any way was her film, the short film she made, Music of Regret. And so it felt very natural. It almost just felt like, she was going to make a feature, and just because of the busyness of her life, I just happened to get to it first. So and she supported me so much through my feature, not just by acting in it, which was, she had to take a month off from her life, but she also, we shot in her home, we edited in her studio. She, was just a part of every single aspect of getting that film to the screen. And so it felt only natural that I would find ways to support her and that we would be in dialogue about it. So, I acted in this scene. Of course, I had to make it difficult for her by being like 45 minutes late and moaning that I had a stomach ache, but it happened. And then we were, in dialogue for the entire time she shot and edited. And, when you're a mom and daughter, that dialogue isn't always like perfect and polite, but I think it's constructive.
I agree.
So just discuss that a little bit about what it was like to have your daughter sort of, trying to separate the opposite way, so you weren't working a little bit, like you didn't have the powerful mother that was standing over you watching the film. It was, you had your sort of crazy-ass daughter.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, but, there were moments, making a film, anyone who's ever done it will know that it's so not fun. It's so overwhelming and terrifying, and especially as an artist who mostly works alone in a studio. I know that I'm potentially a really good collaborator, but to keep a set going and to deal with the politics of a set is so complex. And there was a room, we shot in mostly all of Ellie's art was shot in this barn area, and there was part of that barn is my husband's painting studio, and there was like a big X and skull and crossbones, and no one could go into his painting studio. But there was a phone in there, so when things got really tense on set, I would go in there and call Lena on the phone and find her no matter where she was, to just tell her the terrible thing that had just happened, and have her talk me down from a cliff, basically. And that's kind of the opposite of a mother-daughter dynamic flipped. There was a night that I walked off set, and I was really upset, and I called Lena to explain it to her, and she said, "Now, when did you walk off set? Did they say cut? And I said, yes. And then I walked off set. She said, Mom, that's not walking off set.
It's only walking off set if you interrupt something. If you're between takes, you're just going into a different room.
Yeah, she said.
I mean, unless that's a problem in my career that I don't know about.
So basically, I walked into a different room, but I was convinced that I'd walked off set and had done something very dramatic. So there were that's an example of the kind of interaction.
I'm a full crazy person, and I've never walked off set. I know that you are safe.
Yeah.
So let's open it up. Questions? Anyone? Comments? We're pretty available. In the back?
Of course.
It was wonderful. I was really getting into the characters, and I wanted to find out what happened next, and I was kind of sorry that it had ended because I wanted to see if he would go and join them for dinner. So, but the excerpts that you picked from the various films were fantastic and brought back a lot of memories. What made you pick the particular films that you selected?
Well, that's a great question. I had a list of, between, my God, my list was getting up to 75 or 100, and I tried to pick things that were iconic, that were recognizable. I mean, there were a few things probably that people didn't recognize. I mean, the dance scene from Badlands might be one of them. Mr. Peabody and the Mermaid is one of my favorite movies, but many people don't know that movie. It's more obscure. But I tried to pick things that where Ellie could flip in terms of gender, like A Clockwork Orange and Jules and Jim, the Jean Moreau in sort of male drag. I thought was a good place for Ellie to go as she was kind of gaining power. And the essence, just to sum it up in one sentence or two, why I picked what I picked, I really love musicals, the American songbook. And I think that in a really good musical, the song is used to move the narrative along. It isn't just people breaking into song and dance and being silly. It often takes the drama, the story, to the next place. So when I decided what sequences to use, they had to move the narrative along. Like basically, in the first Misfits scene, Frank is telling Ellie he likes her, kind of like in real life. And Ellie is basically saying, I don't feel that way about you, Frank, even though she is mentioning Clark Gable's name. And I know you saw the Misfits here a few weeks ago, and David, Sally, and I have spent time talking about that movie. It's just the most phenomenal movie. So I really wanted to borrow from that one.
Thank you.
Laurie, this is really fantastic. I, just as an artist, spends a lot of time in their studio alone when I have the pleasure. The way that you managed to make this about a single woman, a single artist, and you surrounded her with, I thought the casting was fantastic. I loved your co-stars. They were so wonderful, and they kept surprising me, like the way that they would emerge suddenly into roles. What is the name of that movie with Marilyn Monroe and Tony Curtis and
Some Like It Hot.
Some Like It Hot. Sorry, brain damage. I mean, that was just like phenomenal. By the time you got to that, they were like really cooking. It was fantastic.
I thought that they were so great in that scene, John and Robert.
They were really great. But what kept impressing me was that I was watching this movie about the single woman artist in her studio, and it really felt like you maintained that in this really kind of pure way through the whole film. I felt like I stayed with you as a singular artist, pushing your own self, and that seems so unbelievably real to me. I loved all the gender stuff, and I loved all the age stuff too. But
I love what you're saying, April, because we really worried about showing process. I mean, Andy would call those parts, the process parts, and we were so determined to show it. At the same time, we were so frightened that people would just be really bored watching someone set up a studio or carry their camera or walk from one place to another. But I was also determined to get the kind of flavor of the isolation of an artist's life, which hard as it is to believe is not lonely. You know, like it's a pleasure, it's an honor to get into your studio alone. And that's something that we wanted to try to depict, that it's okay, you know.
Yeah, I thought you just did a great job. It's so unusual to see that, so thank you so much.
Coming from, I mean, when artists get it, that's really, you know, I made the movie for, this is so corny, but I made the movie for my people, literally, for artists to appreciate. So.
We also did some work with the music, and I think I'm very fond of the music. We hired a very young composer, Will Epstein, to work with us, and we sort of had long conversations about what the different tone of the music was. And there was the process, you know, the music when she was alone in the studio, when she was doing her work, when she was being a certain way, has a certain kind of tonality to it and a certain kind of flow. And I think really, it's one of the things that every time I watch the film, I'm sort of always impressed with. I think it's the first time he had done a feature.
And his mother's an artist, so he really got it. His mother's Arlene Checkett, this kid, Will Epstein, who did the music. And so he was really interested in finding that connection between the music and the art, having grown up around artist parents.
I'd like to see more of this character. What are you going to do next?
Oh my God, Ellie, I think Ellie's gone. I don't think you'll ever see Ellie again, but I don't know.
You're thinking about something else. You're thinking about something else that's about that, like touches on similar themes but has a different tone. I can speak for you on that one.
I'm thinking about something.
Yeah, you're thinking you're brewing a new project. You talk about it sometimes.
Yeah.
Like she's very like when I'm working on something new, I tell everyone what it is, and I love to bounce it off people. She's very circumspect about everything. She's very private, and so you sort of don't know, and then suddenly this fully formed thing comes out. It's probably a better strategy.
Well, it's probably the reason you're the way you are, because you have this mother.
Yes. Yeah.
There was obviously an arc in terms of Ellie's character. You know, she was sort of a non-successful and kind of came out as a happy ending. And I'm wondering if that was something that you had intended from the beginning, or if it was a kind of natural progression.
Also a great question. That's what I intended. I thought I want to make a film about a woman artist, and the happy ending will be not that she will end up in a relationship, but that she will get an exhibition at a gallery. And I knew who she was. I mean, I got to know her. I practically knew what food she liked to eat. I really, really got so deep into her character. But the first thing that I knew about this script, even before I knew how to, I had to learn how to use script writing software. I didn't know anything. But the first thing I knew about this script was that there would be a happy ending, and it would be that she would get a show. And, that was the arc. And I also, I always loved there are a couple of iterations of the Swept Away movie, but the Lena Wertmuller version where you meet a guy in the beginning and you think he's always kind of yucky, he's kind of pudgy, he's kind of whatever, and then you kind of grow with him in the movie. And when I first started screening it, I think at some of our first festivals, women would come up to me and say, and Frank was really cute. And I thought, snap, because I really wanted Frank to become a sympathetic and almost romantic character, which I don't think he is when you first hear him say the words colonic cafe. I think he grows into his, what do we say, cuteness? I don't know. His charm and his
Charm.
Yeah, his charm and his appeal.
Oh, sorry.
I have a
We
mic,
got the
so-
mic there. It's perfect.
I wanted to ask about the dog because anytime you put a dog in a film, there's a reason for it. And this dog is a disabled dog at the beginning, and she seems very dependent on it. He's almost like like a attachment stuffed animal that she carries around. And then, I don't know, was a dog a metaphor for her own inability to, like she was so fearful when the dog went out into the woods, even for 30 seconds. What was Bing's role in this?
Well, I think, Bing was my dog named Dean, and Dean had this degenerative myelopathy, and I spent so much time watching that kind of beautiful gait. And I thought, I have to get this on film. So I actually shot a lot of the footage. Dean died in 2014. We started shooting in the spring of 2015. So in preparation for the movie, I'd gotten so much footage of this, dog kind of wobbling around, because there was something so beautiful and touching about him, I thought. And also, Ellie is based on so many women artists I know. She's absolute compilation. I never reveal who the people are, but a number of the women do have dogs, use dogs in their work. That would give it away right there. I've seen that relationship. I had this dog that I just adored that dog, but I've seen that relationship of the single woman artist and her dog, and I felt like it was just part of her character. And the big secret is that Andy always tells is there are 3 different dogs in the movie. Dean and his 2 cousins.
But I would say Dean did the heavy lifting.
I would say, yeah.
I would say the other ones were glorified stand-ins.
I would say that's true.
Yeah.
They were much appreciated.
I have a short comment and a question. Your acting in the movie reminded me a lot of Jill Clayburgh, which was one of my favorite actresses.
Jill Clayburgh's like the best actress who's ever
That's
lived.
like the best compliment.
Yeah.
You actually reminded me of her so much.
That's like the best compliment.
How long did it take you to film?
Well, the first scenes, some of the scenes were shot in 2013. I shot 30 minutes of the film to try to get a producer, to try to see if I could get anyone interested in working with me, and the only person who was is here right now. And
Somewhere in a bar in Brooklyn.
yeah, I found him. So yeah, he always says I picked him up in a bar. But we worked together for about a year, and we started shooting in it was Andy's idea, which I thought was a really great idea, to shoot all of Ellie's art separately as though Ellie was actually making her art. So we shot all of the vignettes on a soundstage in Brooklyn. So then we weave them into the rest of the film after the narrative part was shot. So that was February of February of 2015. Then a 21-day shoot in the summer of 2015. And then actually 3 years ago tonight, because is tonight the full moon?
Yeah.
So the scene where Frank lifts his hat was on the full moon on August. This full moon tonight is when we shot that after we were finished. And then we went back in December. It was about 12 degrees, and reshot the end of the movie. And the part where Ellie falls for Frank when he's sitting on her porch in drag, that was a very corny scene where Frank showed up with flowers all scrubbed up, and it was awful, I thought. And then we came up with this idea that Frank would still be in drag and Ellie would realize she was attracted to him then, because by that time he was totally her creation. So she was sort of falling in love with her own work, with her own, with something she had created. And so we sort of like that ending better.
I just wanted to say the wardrobe in the film was amazing, and I'm sure a lot of the inspiration came from the film, but what other inspiration did you have for the wardrobe? And I love what you're wearing tonight, too.
Thank you.
It should be noted she picked both of our outfits, and when I woke up this morning, this was on a hanger waiting for me. I was only permitted to choose my own sneakers.
A lot of the wardrobe came out of, I have an archive. I've saved so many of my own clothes through the years. And I had a great wardrobe person, Stacy Patat, who's worked on she works on most of Sofia Coppola's movies, but obviously our budget was small, so we used so much stuff that I had in this clothing archive. But You know, that first scene at Yale, those were my actual Yale students, was 2013. And at that point, I thought that Ellie was going to be this sort of crazy, air quotes, woman artist. And I've come to a point where I'm very resentful of the word crazy in the same sentence as woman artist, because I feel like that's what the culture wants right now. They want women artists to be quite old and quite crazy. So as the movie progresses and I started to understand that, I made Ellie's wardrobe become less and less crazy, to use that word again. I wanted her to be very sort of simple and direct and almost plain in her regular life, and all the crazy to come out in her work, which is the way that I think most artists that I know are. So there was a real evolution throughout the movie in terms of the wardrobe. And I don't know if that's what you meant about the inspiration, but I was totally involved in the wardrobe part.
I was just reflecting on my own reaction to this movie. And I found the ending flat. And the whole thing was alive for me. But the ending was flat. And I don't know why. But
Did you want the Hollywood ending where the two of them ended up together? I think flat.
There was quietude in the setting and aliveness, the whole movie for me. And then it went into the studio. It was kind of black and white. And I don't know if I wanted something, but it just, the studio made it, flattened it for me.
What flattened it?
You mean the art opening at the end?
The end, the gallery.
The gallery.
The gallery.
It's so
just
interesting.
being in the gallery.
I think that there were several ways in which we thought about ending it, independent of it being a happy ending, which Laurie spoke about. But it was also supposed to be open-ended and not very clear. You weren't supposed to know whether Frank was going to go and have dinner with her. You weren't supposed to know if the review was really that good or what it even meant. You weren't going to even know whether or not she's going to be a successful artist, really. It was just, and there wasn't that many people in the exhibition. So it wasn't, a wild, super successful fantasy, ending about how the art world could turn the person into something bigger than they were. It was just for her, as her process, it was the end of this story, and she would then go on. And to a certain extent, that is a little bit, we were going to shoot a scene of her after she put down the iPad, walking off into the Bowery by herself, and we spent a lot of time thinking about the falseness of endings, independent of it being a happy ending. She got what she wanted. She was content. She had a moment. But like every artist, you pick yourself up and you start again. And those endings are very anticlimactic. You think it's going to change your life, but at the end of the day, it's just this it's a winsome smile.
I mean, what I just remembered is that we had our theatrical run at the Quad last January, and one of the reviews, I mean, there have been an amazing press and really interesting reviews, and a couple of total bummers, which is to be expected. But one reviewer said it's early in the year, but I will say that by the end of the year, I'm sure that I will consider this one of the 10 best endings of any movie I've seen. So I'm waiting for his list to see if I get on the list. But that's what makes a horse race, like for him it was the great ending, and for you the flat ending. But I appreciate that feedback.
Mike is coming.
Question, and what was the budget, just out of curiosity? This is the first question. And by the way, I love the ending. And actually, to me, the ending added a lot. I found it poetic, and it was very good that it wasn't clear how it will go, yet it was ended on a positive note. That's at least how I saw it. Okay, so what was the budget? Thank you.
I have a sort of a canned answer to that, because
the budget.
The budget. If I told you it was $25, some people would think, oh my God, you did so much for $25, and then some people say, that's why it looks so lousy. You know, so this idea of talking about money at these kind of things is interesting, certainly for me, because partly that's what I do, but it sort of changes how people think about it. I mean, it was made for, you know, it was made for more than 200,000 and less than 2 million. You know what I mean? Or, you know, there's
Andy,
a way
are
to
you really
talk
not
about
gonna-
it, but it just all it does is sort of, and if you do this a lot, especially if you do independent films, every time you talk about how much it costs, it always works against you. I don't know why. It just seems like, well, that's way too much. Why do they, you know, or it's way too little. How do they do it? But then, like, a distributor won't buy it because they think you didn't spend enough money, so they'll nickel and dime you when they, you know. So it's a.
It was way too little.
Yeah. We worked very hard. We did not have to mortgage the ranch, but we made it for probably less money than you would imagine.
Yeah, and it's because I had a great producer who knew how to cut corners and do amazing things. I mean, the most interesting question is how much it costs to make Tiny Furniture, because that was one of the first movies shot digitally.
It was the first feature shot on the 5D.
So
we claimed. We have not been corrected.
That seemed to be widely considered to be the first feature shot on the 5D, which is the camera that I would use to shoot stills. I mean, it's amazing what you did, and I think that your budget was something like $30,000.
Yeah, it was like $50,000 all in, but that was also because, I mean, budgets are such a weird, deceiving thing, because the things you get for free, the talent you get for free, the locations you get for free. I actually have no idea what your budget was, or I would just tell, but I just don't know.
Well, the difference, I mean, I was so inspired by Tiny Furniture and what it cost to make it, and I thought, oh, that means that I can actually make a movie, because I was correct in thinking that nobody in Hollywood was going to fund my movie, and they didn't. But what I certainly realized quickly was that I'm a grown-up, she wasn't, and I have to pay people. Like, I couldn't, in good conscience, have people working on my movie who weren't getting paid. Even interns got paid, they got food. I mean, that's just the way it is. So when you're young and you're working with a bunch of young people as a team, everybody's, you know, it's like, let's make a movie. But that's not what we could end up doing.
In the back?
I just wanted to quickly follow up on the significance of the dog. Hope you don't get mad at me for saying this.
No.
But it seems like the men in the movie were all sort of crippled in their own way and had to be carried by you throughout the movie.
I thought that I think that take is very interesting, but I think that all of the characters, including Ellie, had reached an impasse in their life, and they were looking for something. They didn't know what it was. And I don't know if the men were more crippled or hamstrung, I mean, than Ellie was. I think that everyone was trying to, did you? Oh, interesting. Well, Parker was out of control. I mean, that is not, you know, I directed Meryl Streep in my first movie, a 45-minute short called The Music of Regret, and then I got to obviously direct Parker in this movie, and people always say, what was it like to direct Meryl? What was it like to direct Parker? Oh, I didn't have to do anything. I didn't do anything. They are off and away on their own. Parker was going to do what Parker was going to do, and Meryl doesn't require any direction. So that character, that Parker character, is not the way I wrote her completely, but she was Parker's creation, and she was really, you know, intense and strong.
It was also interesting to watch Josh, who hasn't had as much acting experience as Parker, realize that all his preparation for a character he had read in the script to be his wife was going to be Parker, and when Parker arrived, she had no interest in being the character that Josh thought he was acting with at all. And so some of his stuff is trying to figure out, I mean, his character, there's a scene when they're talking in the garden, and he just switches. He realizes he's not going to control this at all. and he gets very, very, very soft. And I think
And
it's
it
quite
helped-
beautiful. But
Yeah, it
it's a
helped the
beautiful
performance. And that piece of casting, that was, I don't know who I had in mind to play Tom, but it was some really young, handsome guy. And then Lena had worked with Josh and suggested him, and I thought he was really, like, amazing. And he does have the same birthday as Marlon Brando, so he just... But I remember the night that we shot, and he was doing his, streetcar thing, and I thought we had a lot of trouble shooting because the neighbors were really wary, and it wasn't easy to do. And I just thought, now the police are going to come after he screams Stella. It was so loud. And
again, in the back. Keeping him working over there.
When you were doing the process, which was very interesting to see how the different things were set up, and you had and very creative. I remember looking at the box that had all the light bulbs, and you were putting the light bulbs in. Was the character aware of how she was going to be using those things eventually, or was it something that was already planned out? I'm talking about from the character. I know you would know. Or was the character kind of like creating something and then deciding how to use it in a film?
I think that there was a lot of, there were elements of fantasy and also impossibility. Like, none of the vignettes could have been shot with that silly little Bolex camera. There were 2 shots. There were close-ups. There were all kinds of, clearly Ellie herself could not have made any of those vignettes. They had very high production value. So that was when I think, our goal was when the Misfits came on the screen for people to realize, and this is what I wanted, whoa, this isn't the movie I thought it was going to be. And I wanted everything to shift at the moment that the Misfits came on the screen. Also, Ellie having the props and the wigs. I think in real life, Ellie she seemed to have no idea what she was doing. So that was, another one of the elements, the fantasy elements of the movie where things didn't add up to, like everything Ellie was doing didn't sort of coordinate well with it wasn't real life, is what I'm saying.
I'm going to say something that's so rude, which is, you guys, I had a hysterectomy this year. I have literally no ability to control the stream of my urine. I have to pee so badly. I'm humiliated, but, I'm going to pee in this chair. So you guys finish up.
You could have whispered that to me.
I could have done anything
Okay,
but what I'm
go,
doing
please.
right now. Love everybody here. I'll see you right outside.
Okay. That's my daughter.
We'll use her peeing to, it will be like 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap it up.
I think maybe.
Laurie, I'm just so impressed by your performance. That's what held my attention.
Oh.
And I really like seeing some of your props from your photographs, like the cake.
Yeah.
So can you speak to how you place those at different parts of the film?
Well, I
and
just
what your
really
intention was?
loved dropping clues about, I had to make it fun for me because when we were shooting the movie, and this is how I felt when we were shooting Tiny Furniture, I could only imagine, 5 to 10 people actually seeing the movie, most of them my family, Andy's wife. It's just when you're making a movie, you just don't know what kind of life it has. So I was trying to keep it interesting for myself. So I kept dropping clues. Like I did between 1980 and 1983, I shot solely underwater. So I wanted a scene that was underwater. There were dollhouses that I've used in different series, the Artist Winkler series, the Longhouse series, all of the props.
No ventriloquists, though.
Yeah, that's interesting. There were no ventriloquist heads. I think they were in New York at the time. I think we didn't have them there. But I did, when Ellie is shooting along those old photographs, my head was, I don't even think people saw that. We worked so hard on it, but my head was superimposed on the head of the actors and actresses. So I just kept trying to just make it like laden and rich with clues and things that would amuse me or us when we saw it.
But I think it's also this idea of leaving this the process of what she was building, and so it takes the failures, it takes the other photographs, it takes the other stuff that don't make it into the vignettes to also see what she's building and what she's working on. And I think that especially the stuff you were shooting against the wall and with the, you know, with the photographs, were just to kind of enhance this idea that she was a working artist and she was trying to find these things. And it was, you don't know whether she's going to use it or not, but it's the process stuff.
Yeah,
I think the process stuff is important.
Every prop was so important to me. Like when I was smoking in the garden, when I met Frank, I was holding my friend Lynn Tillman's book, one of my closest friends. The art dealer scene, Andy's wife, Juliana Bruno's book Surface was on the table. Like every single prop, and I mean, it's interesting that you would pick up on that because they all had some sort of personal meaning for us.
One more question, I guess. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Well, that was good. Up. There we go.
So you know about the demise of the Wandering Moose. Are you a Cornwallian?
My daughter is, and I'm going there on Friday.
Oh, yeah.
And it's still there, but it's a different
It's called
ownership.
Pearlie's now.
Yeah, but it's...
Well, look, we're not in Cornwall. It was never great then, and I hear it's not so good now. So.
Well, I'm not going to make a comment. I only ate there once.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of the breakfasts you got to, you know.
Yeah. I love
Thanks.
the scenes in that, in The Wandering Moose. It brings back memories.
Thanks for coming. Thanks. Keep supporting the
so
SAG.
much.
I mean, it's very important. We're starting to build, so
Yeah.
we're going to open soon. So everybody, we need support. We need people to be really behind the project, both creatively and financially. So thanks for coming. See you next week.